This is Emilee Kurt, and you're listening to the Caretaker's Journey podcast.
Welcome to this week's Meaningful Conversation. I'm your host, Carole Leathem. Today, we are going to tackle a really hard topic, cancer. My guest on the show today is Emilee Kurt, and her mom is battling cancer. I met Emilee in September of 2023 when we were roommates at a retreat for creatives in the Smoky Mountains of Tennessee. I immediately fell in love with her smile and her spirit. Emilee's smile starts with her eyes, and then it just fills up her whole face, and it's contagious, and you can't help but smile too when she smiles. Emilee is a fellow coffee lover, and she loves to study the scripture. She is a true creative, and from the moment you log onto her website, you're going to notice two things. Number one, she loves bright colors. I love that. And number two, you cannot deny her love, capital L-O-V-E, for Jesus. She's been writing about the goodness of Jesus online for over a decade. Emilee also coaches and equips people to get unstuck and then discover and then live on the mission that they have been given by God. She does this through three unique options. First, she is Clementine Creative, where she provides fresh and fun marketing and design solutions for small businesses. You can go to emeleekurt.com, where you will be dared to live fully in Christ right where you are. And then she has a special arm of ministry called With the Shepherd, where she pours into the disciples who are already pouring into other people. And she does this through encouraging them, writing, and one-on-one coaching. She and her husband, Zach, are celebrating 5 years of marriage soon, and they live in Manhattan, Kansas, with their beautiful, sweet lab, Ursher. And I say Ursher because he is named after the singer, because we both also share a love for Ursher. I can't wait. I know. I just saw that beautiful smile. Y'all can't see her, but she has got that beautiful smile. You say Zach and Ursher, and it's there. I can't wait for you to meet her. Welcome, Emilee, to the show.
Oh my gosh, Carol. I wish we were sitting with Rebecca and eating chicken pot pie. But
it's with ice cream.
I know, but it's so good to just hang out again.
I know. Thank you for joining us. Thank you also for your willingness and your transparency in this really what can be a hard, meaningful conversation about cancer. I know personally how hard it is because I am actually loving and walking through cancer with a family member who is actually doing okay right now, but it's a hard journey. So to start off, can you give us a bit of backstory on your family and how you got your mom's cancer diagnosis?
Yeah, sure. So thanks for that kind introduction. I'm so grateful to be here. So my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer in July of 2022. So it was just a few months after I had actually moved from up the street from her to across state lines. And so she's diagnosed with breast cancer and quickly found out that it was HER2 positive and that it had spread to other parts of the body. So originally thought it was one spot, and it had already spread by the time that we started treatment. And so her official diagnosis is stage 4 metastatic breast cancer, which is a whole other beast.
Yeah. So, what were your first thoughts and your feelings when you first, number one, you just moved away from living near them, and now you find this diagnosis. So what were your first thoughts and your feelings when you heard about this diagnosis?
Yeah. I appreciate this question because it seems like so long ago. We haven't stopped treatment since July 2022. I would say initially it was just shock. As you shared, oh my gosh, I'm in cancer too, and loving on a family member with cancer. It's just a club that you never expect that you will be in. You always see and hear about, and you're always praying for someone else, but it always seems on the fringes, and you just don't imagine it happening to you until it's literally your whole life. It goes from being something so far away to being the only thing on your mind. And so shock. Another thing I remembered through this question was, at first I was like, you know what? it could be, in quotations, just breast cancer, because and a lot of my grandma had breast cancer years ago, and it had been a really somewhat easy process. Obviously, cancer is never easy, but they caught it so early, and she didn't have to do treatment, and it was just so
Mhm.
quick. And so but it went quickly from being just breast cancer to knowing all of the rest, the storm cloud that was also above us.
Yeah.
And so definitely went into survival mode for a long time.
So how far away did you move from her? You said across state lines, but how far, like travel wise, are you from her?
Yeah. So we have already moved back where we're actually closer.
Okay.
But for that season, we were 2.5, 3 hours away.
Okay. And then now are
Mhm.
you back in the same town with her?
We currently live 40 minutes apart, so
Okay.
close enough to hang out. I live really close to the hospital where she gets all of her treatments and stuff, but not in the same town. So,
Okay.
yeah.
So what when that black storm cloud, I love how you described it as a black storm cloud because you
Hmm.
can kind of see it coming in the distance and then it kind of moves in and then it goes away, but it never totally goes away. I love when you see the storms. That's one of the things that I've loved about traveling in the Midwest is y'all
Yes.
have the best storms.
Come
And
visit
so
me in the Flint Hills, and you can see them from 15 miles away.
yes. And so it's something, when a storm is coming, it's coming, but it's not already there. And it's hard because I found myself when I was visiting my brother who also lives in the Midwest, walking out onto the porch and seeing this storm off in the distance and then kind of standing there waiting and waiting and waiting for it to come. And then sometimes it changes directions, it goes different ways. And I kind of feel like the diagnosis of cancer
Mhm.
can be like that because
Yeah.
when you first get it, it's like crazy. What are you going to do? That fear, all of those emotions that come in. But
Mhm.
then the next step is, okay, how do I support my loved one? So, what were the first steps that and is it your dad that is the main
Mhm.
caregiver for her?
Mhm. Yeah.
So, what are the
So,
first steps that you and your dad took
mhm.
towards just helping your mom get through this?
Yeah, practically that looked like hopping in the car, packing my stuff the day they came to tell me that she had this ahead of her. We did a biopsy to confirm everything, and then she jumped into surgery very quickly. She had a lumpectomy, but that is the same day we discovered that it had spread into her lymph nodes and was other places in her body. And so she has been on chemo treatment since September of 2022, as soon as she
Okay.
recovered from that surgery. And she's also had a stint of radiation.
Okay.
But it's also included a lot of natural solutions. She's completely
Hmm.
changed the way she lives and the way that she eats, with supplements, all the things. Another thing that we've done practically throughout the process is there's some times where you just listen to your main oncologist and you just do the next thing that they say. And then there's times when your gut tells you or the spirit tells you to keep going and seeking other opinions. So at times we've
Hmm.
sought second and third and fourth opinions,
Okay.
when that's happened.
And and when you've sought the additional opinions, have you found different avenues of treatment that you would prefer to go down?
Yes, we have found, I think it was last summer when we sought a second opinion, and truly just the way that they navigated that, we truly saw the Lord's like saving and healing work in the fact that we didn't just automatically go with what was the easiest option.
Hmm.
Sometimes we found a doctor that was just a little bit more aggressive, a little bit more proactive. And then there's
Okay.
also a season to just not do that depending on where everything is at. But um, yeah, it's definitely just been spirit led of sometimes we just stick with the next right thing, and sometimes we just know that it's time to go somewhere else.
Yeah. And I heard you say that she totally changed her life as far as what she eats. So, what are some of the main things that she
Mm.
changed? I'm sure there's some listeners whose ears perked up. Mine did. So, what are some things that she implemented or changed in her life that you have seen have made a difference?
Yeah. So, she does not eat any sugar, any grain. She eats dairy, meat, cheese, and vegetables. Vegetables and
Okay.
fruits. If it grows out of the ground, she eats it. If it comes out of
Okay.
a box, she doesn't, essentially.
Well, more and more and more, I'm thinking that that's probably. I had a guest on a few weeks ago who wrote a book called 12 Ways to Age Gracefully. And what you just said is exactly what she said, that if it looks like something that's grown or
Mhm.
out of the ground, but if it's out of a box, don't do it. And
Mhm.
so I can see that because processed foods have so much
Mhm.
chemical and additives and things like that. So,
Yeah.
okay. Um, so, how do you personally support and encourage your mom? Because I know there's two people here. There's your dad, who is the main
Mhm.
caregiver. So, how many siblings do you have?
I have 2 brothers.
Okay. So,
Mhm.
are you the main child who is involved in this because you're the girl and we tend to take on we tend to take on that role?
Yes.
Not to say about your brothers, but as women, we
It's
do
just a
tend to take on that
natural. The Lord has made us nurturers. The Lord has made
role.
us mothers in all different seasons. So yes, I would say for sure, geographically and emotionally.
Mhm.
I think we've talked about a lot of practicals, um, but I would say the hardest part and the way that I show up like on a daily basis is there's times that we've had to sit together and she tells me what she wants for her funeral and we talk
Mm,
about what she wants at the end of her life and
mhm.
um, her wishes when it comes to that. And then there's times to dream about what her next creative project will be. Because, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, the Lord does a miracle. And now she has this new lease on life. And it's like, oh my gosh, like
Mhm.
4 months ago, I was doing this and now we're here. And so I think it's not a magic formula of like, oh, one time you'll be struggling and then one time it's really easy. It's like that can be back and forth on a daily, hourly, weekly basis of what she needs in that moment, you know? So I would say that's the way that I show up most often. And I think something that's really powerful is we can hope and pray for other people when they can't for themselves. Um,
Absolutely.
and so that looks like spiritual care, emotional care, but
Mhm.
also the practical of let's go to chemo and I'm going to drive through Starbucks on the way and just sit with you. Like there's
Mhm.
so many things you can do, but honestly, just like being a presence and not being
Mhm.
scared of the medical side or the emotional side is so important.
I know when my husband first began to struggle with his mental health issues, and there were days where we couldn't get the depression under control and the suicidal ideation was just running rampant. And I didn't know from day to day what was going to happen because
Hmm.
there's only so much that I could do. And
Hmm.
I remember that I had a friend who would just show up
Yeah.
and sit there and say nothing.
Hmm.
And she would just like bring coffee,
Hmm.
which, is our love language.
Yes.
Our love bring coffee. And sometimes I think you made a statement that I just really resonated with. You said, just show up and not be scared. Just
Hmm.
show up and provide this encouragement. Show up
Hmm.
and give a hug. Show up and just not try to solve it
Yeah.
because there's so many people trying to solve this. I had so many nurses and doctors and psychiatrists and healthcare workers and social
Mhm.
workers and all of these people are trying to solve this that I didn't need anybody else to try to tell me how to solve it. What I needed was just someone to
Mhm.
encourage, support, sit quietly,
Yeah.
and really to encourage me. And this is kind of what I heard you with your mom encourage me to live in that moment and don't watch the storm cloud coming across
Mhm.
the mountains or coming across the plains or don't watch in California. I don't live near the beach, but I live close enough that the beach is my sort of my picture.
Yeah.
And I would tell my therapist, it's like I can see a tidal wave coming across the
So what am I
ocean.
supposed to do?
Yes.
Yeah.
Where do I run? And I would feel myself just start to brace and take on all of that tension.
Mhm.
And the tidal wave might not even arrive, or it might take a week,
Yeah.
you know? And so I think living in the moment and just loving and encouraging your mom and just being with her,
Mhm.
I think that's so huge. I just applaud you for that. So, how did you during this journey, or how do you still? I'm going to ask you another question at the end, but this is not that question. This is
Okay.
about self care, but I'm going to ask
Okay.
you this question. How have you taken care of yourself? Because I believe that
Mhm.
this ministry that I have founded has four parts. It's the spiritual foundation. Then there's the emotional, there's the physical, there's the mental.
Mhm.
So you have to take care of yourself, or you can't take care of anybody else. So, how did you, Emilee, take care of yourself? And what have you seen change in your own life as far as what's
Mhm.
important in self care since your mom was diagnosed?
Yeah. So when she was diagnosed, we had just moved away and had hopped into full-time vocational ministry. My husband was working for the ministry. I was working at home, and because of his ministry position, we couldn't like attend church for almost a
Mhm.
year. Like a
Mm.
handful of times were we ever able to attend church together. And so it was the perfect storm. That's how I describe it, even outside of this conversation. It was the perfect storm of no community, no church family, no
Yeah.
consistency, and being far from family during
Yeah.
cancer.
Yeah.
So put that all together. And in November of 2022, everything just kind of came to the end of ourselves, and imagined losing everything that I had ever put my identity in. I saw myself lose
Mhm.
in every single relationship I had ever put my identity in every single job,
Mhm.
in every single all of this was like, oh, this could all be taken away from me. And
Mhm.
while that was the hardest month of my life, it made certain things non negotiable moving forward. And
Yeah.
it made me finally hire a therapist. So,
Yeah.
first on the list is therapy. I
Yes.
worked with a
Amen, girl.
I worked with a therapist long term, even when it was like I had some people say, "Well, so why are you still there?" And I'm like, this is a spiritual discipline of
Mhm.
being humble and like being the healthiest version of myself I can be. You know, there's that worldly narrative of being the best version and ideal version. But I'm like,
Yeah.
I can be the healthiest version of me, and this is one thing that keeps me in that place. But in this season, that currently looks like meeting with a life coach. So I work
Mhm.
with a coach on a regular basis who knows it all, and like helps me in my spiritual walk and moving forward with just accountability and long term encouragement.
Yeah.
But back to that season of things being taken away or not having a church family, the basics that we know are the easiest things to let go of when like we're busy or we're emotionally exhausted. It's like I just want
Yes.
to skip church. I just want to sleep in. And so church, scripture, all of those things is just a huge priority in our schedule these days. Another thing I've been doing is scheduling time to be alone and also scheduling time with friends.
Yes.
That I like to be really spontaneous, but sometimes that means I fill up my time so much because I do love people, but I recharge by being alone and like reading and
Mhm.
studying and thinking. And so, like, that's a super practical. I can just hand and say, okay, keep your appointments with Jesus like you would keep your appointment that you're paying for at the
Oh,
doctor.
absolutely. I did the same thing because I too recharge by just being in this room where I'm at right now. This is my sort of sanctuary where I
Yeah.
come. And this is where I recharge. I come in
Yeah.
and bring my coffee and I sit down and I pick up a book, or I'll listen to worship music, or I'll work,
Yeah.
on the podcast, or I'm working on another book,
Mhm.
whatever I'm working on at the time.
Mhm.
And then I have to schedule. So my
Mhm.
calendar is crazy because I schedule everything.
That's so
I
good.
schedule
Yeah.
coffee with a friend. I schedule time to write and try to be true to the scheduled time to go to the gym every day. My biggest, I don't know if you have this problem, but my biggest problem, because I recharge by being alone, I tend to isolate. When I get
Yes.
overwhelmed and I get out of balance,
Same.
my therapist quickly pointed out to me that I
Mhm.
am the queen of isolation.
Mhm.
And I would prefer to be in my castle all alone with the covers pulled over
In
my
my
head.
pajamas, please. Yes.
Yes,
Mhm.
yes. And so he quickly told me that when I start to isolate, then I'm walking into dangerous territory.
Yes.
And I love that I have friends
Mhm.
who, if they haven't heard from me, one of them is our mutual friend. If she hasn't heard from me, she'll send me a text and she'll go, "Hey, where you been? What you doing? You
Yes.
know, are you isolating?" And I'm like, "Oh
Mhm.
no." And then
What are you
she'll go,
talking about?
"Uh-huh." But I think we need those people who pull us out, who see. And this is another thing about who we put in our life at these times, which kind of leads me to this next question, because I've had people walk away from us because of the mental health issues that my
Yeah.
husband struggles with,
Mhm.
because I think they don't know what to say. I think it scares them. I think they saw him as such a strong person. And
Yeah.
if this could affect him in this way, then where is the hope for everyone else? And so I had people walk away, and then I got almost cynical for a little while, and I had some friends who had to just literally bulldoze down the door and just kind of
Mhm.
force their way back in to kind of show me that isolation is not the key. So, how have you seen the people around you? I mean, number one, do you have, I mean, you said you struggle with isolation as well, but how have you seen the people around you and your family respond to
Mhm.
this? And what has changed for you?
Hmm. Oh man, how have I seen people respond? I would say there's, every person has literally reacted differently, and the
Hmm.
people that you think are going to be your people are not. And then the people that you don't think will be your people are the ones that you like find yourself gravitating towards and talking to
Yeah.
more. And so what you said about people that have left, like that people have definitely left because I've exposed. That's the tricky thing, right? Is you go from isolation to like sharing, and then they're like, "Oh, actually,
Yeah.
And so the
Wait,
beautiful.
I didn't really want to know this. That's what they say. Wait, I had somebody say to me, "I know I asked you this question, but I really don't want to know the answer." That's what she said to me.
Oh my
She said to
gosh.
me, I want to know, but I don't really want to know.
Yeah.
So I'm really sorry I asked you right now.
So I think the beautiful thing about that is, we always talk about defining the relationship in terms of romantic relationships, but I have never defined as many friendships. Like, I've never had
Yes.
that need as much as walking through a crisis like this. And it has been incredibly painful, but I've really just had to come to terms with one, like, this person says they were there for me, and they're not. They don't have that in them. They don't have the capacity, or they don't have fill in the blank for whatever reason.
Yeah.
So I get to lean into these other relationships. And guess what? That friendship is someone that you catch up with over brunch, or, you just
Mhm.
have to redefine that relationship. Anyway, I'm kind of getting off. kind of
No,
getting off,
no,
but that just.
you're actually going down the trail that I have had to do,
Yeah.
because I've really had to figure out, okay, what does this relationship look like,
Mhm.
and why is it not working, and why am I hurt all the time? And part of it is that I would take on the responsibility for the other person's
Mhm.
ineffectiveness or not wanting to understand or whatever. I was blaming myself when in reality it wasn't me at all. And I think the importance of therapy
Mhm.
is that my therapist actually helped me take a step back and go, yeah, these people, it's hard, because if it hits close to home,
Mhm.
whereas they see it in your life,
Yeah.
then all of a sudden there's a fear. Ooh, this is too close.
Mhm.
This could hit my life. I could get cancer. I could have mental health issues.
Mhm.
And I've discovered that some of the people who've walked away actually have mental health. They have undiagnosed mental health issues,
Mhm.
and or a loved one does. And we just want to bury that.
I think
So
I think the
go
biggest
ahead.
thing along with redefining those friendships is then when you find the like beautiful surprise of like, oh, this brand new friend is there for me, or this friend that I wasn't expecting to be there because they live 3 states away, or this friend that I just met at church is now like super invested. I think figuring out what you need and then being able to verbally ask your friends for what you need. I had a
Absolutely.
season when I was feeling like I was just spiritually leading in most of my even friendships, even outside of my
Mhm.
discipleship, like formal relationships. And I reached out to a friend and said, "Hey, I really need someone to ask me how my marriage is, ask me how my walk with the Lord is, and ask me how my mom is on a like weekly basis.
Yeah.
Can you please ask me those questions every week because I don't feel like anyone's asking me?" And I think
Yeah.
we steal so much from ourselves when we just want someone to know that we need that.
Yeah.
And there's so much like intimacy and growth that happens because you're actually able, because then they can actually love you in the way that you need.
Yes, absolutely. And it's hard because when you're caring for someone who has mental health issues, there are days where you just feel so alone.
Yeah,
And you're not isolating, but you just feel alone because it's a very, especially in a marriage, it can be a very, I'm being very real and
for
very,
sure.
transparent here, which is what I've committed to in the podcast. It can be very hard.
Hmm.
It can be very, very, very lonely.
Like, I just
And
want someone to be there for me.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and so yeah, and not just trying to tell me how to fix it,
Yes.
but asking me the questions, because sometimes when someone asks me a question, and we have a mutual friend, Rebecca, and I told Rebecca, I said, at some point your voice is going to come on to the your name is going to come up either in my mouth or Emilee's mouth, because for me, Rebecca is that safe sounding board where she will call
Mhm.
me, or she'll speak truth to me,
Yeah.
and I love that. Now, what's really ironic for me that I have learned is that y'all can't, out there in the world, you don't see what I'm not using the video portions of our conversation, but I have outaged, these women by maybe a good 30 plus years. And there is a beautiful, beautiful thing that has happened in my life
Mhm.
as I have been willing to open up to these younger women like
Mhm.
you and Rebecca,
Mhm.
because what it has done, it has brought a totally different perspective
Mhm.
of love and care and just encouragement into my life. And so that is just such a beautiful thing for me to see how God has taken this season of my life and brought women into my life that are younger than my children,
Yes.
who are loving and encouraging and supporting me
And
and
again, if
helping me.
you could have easily just like shut that door mentally of like, "Oh, that was nice. She's so nice. She's just a baby, but that was fun." And instead, like think about honestly like what you would miss if we would just like
Well,
not been open to that. And the Lord has so many like good surprises for us in our
oh,
friendship.
you
And
talk about surprises. The wisdom that pours out of the women like you and Rebecca and a couple of the others that I have met,
mhm,
the wisdom and the understanding and the love and the laughter and the fun, that pours out is so much different than I could have ever imagined. So, what would you say? This is a two-part question here
okay.
for you. So, what would you say the most important thing is that you have learned in your life in walking through this journey of encouraging and supporting your mom? And then what is the one thing, and it could be the same or it could be different, what is the one thing you would want to share with our listeners if there's like one truth that you need them to hear? So
Mhm,
what's the one thing you've learned,
mhm.
and then what is the one truth, if you could say, oh, I can only tell you one truth, this is it?
Okay. Um, I think I I can go to a very dark place. And so cancer, obviously, like being on the forefront of your mind. I heard a pastor recently say, people don't really think about death very often. And I was like, oh, wow. I think about death every single day.
Yeah.
And if you have experienced cancer, no matter what kind of cancer, suddenly you're faced with your humanity
Yeah.
and the limits of our life. And I think we can either sink into that and we
Mhm.
can feel sorry for ourselves and we can stay in our pajamas all the time and or we can face the very real reality that eternity is real. And
Yes.
I am going to die. And one day,
Yes.
all of my family members are going to die. And we can either sit in hopelessness or we can lift our eyes to Jesus and know that eternity is real. And, I hate what cancer has done in the sense that I'm always thinking about the end. I'm all,
Yeah.
there's this like undercurrent of like, okay, like we were talking about earlier, you really have to stay present in a way that I've never had
Yeah.
to fight to be present. So it is
Yes.
it's very hard. However, I've never thought about, dreamt about, and studied heaven more than when I've been
Yeah.
faced with suffering. And so,
Yes.
sink yourself into the fact that eternity is real. And it doesn't mean that you're not facing the truth of death. It actually equips you for facing it.
Yes, and I know for me, I'm a movie buff. I love movies. I watch movies constantly. And in the middle of the journey with my husband, when I was struggling with sleeping because
Yes.
I was so, you just don't know I
Worried.
just felt out of control.
Mhm.
And somehow sleep was so hard for me. And there were other reasons why I talk in great detail in my book about why I could not sleep, but I was up in the middle of the night watching a movie that I love, that I've watched many, many, many times because I rewatch my favorites. And the character is a female, and she walks into a room and she looks at the other guy in the room and she says, "I just want to tell you, everybody dies. You're going to die, and you're living in fear."
Mhm.
And I went, "Ooh," and I hit pause and I rewound it, and I probably listened to that line 2 or 3 times. Why? Because it spoke truth into my life, because this moment is all we're guaranteed.
Mhm.
And we don't know what's gonna happen tomorrow. And so I love that. It goes back to just living today
Mhm.
and loving our family members while we're together.
Mhm.
And really, when I was in Milwaukee in April, I had to sit down on the floor and take my sweet mama's hand because my mom is terminally ill and she's on palliative care. And I had to take her hand and I just said, "Can I pray for you?" And so I got to pray for her. But what it did was it sort of healed some of the grief in my life, because all of a sudden I'm now living in the moment and loving her in the best way I could.
Mhm.
And so I just love that. So,
Mhm.
yeah, and it's so hard because we could go to such a dark place.
Mhm.
So I'm a big believer, Emilee, in self care. And as we close out the show, I always like to ask everybody who's a guest what they're going to do in the next 24 hours to take care of themselves, something just for you.
Mhm.
So, Emilee, what are you going to do in the next 24 hours to take care of you?
I love this question so much. So this goes back to one of my points from earlier, but I have been scheduling my times with the Lord as if they're doctor's appointments, as if they're therapy appointments, and getting out of the house. We always think about
Mhm.
that in our romantic relationships as well, but we don't think about it in other ways. And so I have been going to my favorite coffee shop just to spend time with the Lord.
I love it.
And it fills my cup, and all the normal things like exercise and all those sorts of things, but that's kind of something that is a little bit extra that I highly
Mm.
recommend.
Oh, I love that. If you go to my website and you sign up for my newsletter, the free download is how to brew your coffee, and how that has changed my relationship with the Lord, and how
Mm.
brewing my coffee was just a way. of God getting my attention. And so thank you for that. So how can our listeners find you?
Yes, I would love to get to know you guys. So you can find me on Instagram at Emilee Kurt, and you can find a bunch of free resources and encouragement on my website at emiliekurt.com.
Oh, thank you so much, Emilee, for joining us today. And if you as listeners would like to know more about my personal caretaking journey, the link to my book and my website is in the show notes, as well as how you can find me on social media. And I love to connect with the listeners. You can also find the button to hit or subscribe when you're listening to this podcast. And I would really ask you to do that because it helps other caretakers find the show. If you know a caretaker, share the show with them. You can get the link and you can text it to them and they can just click it. And I've done that with several friends where I just click and send them a podcast because it's encouraging to them. And I'll be back next week for another episode or another meaningful conversation, as I like to call them, about what our caretaking journey involves. And until then, it's all about Him.